I never thought I'd meet someone the whole world already knew, and still feel like I was the only one who truly saw him. I still remember the first morning I met him. The air smelled like rain, and the world outside his gate was so loud, but inside, it was quiet. Too quiet. I was nervous, clutching my small nursing bag as if it could protect me from the weight of his name. Bruce Willis. To most people, he was the man who saved the world in movies. To me, he was just a man learning how to live slowly again, one careful step at a time. When I walked in, he was sitting near the window, sunlight brushing his face like a secret memory. He looked older, yes, but not broken, just gentler. Like someone who had already fought every battle and didn't need to prove anything anymore. "Good morning, Mr. Willis," I said softly. He smiled faintly, that same smile the whole world once knew. And for a moment, I forgot I was standing in front of a legend. Back then, I didn't know how close we'd become. How I'd learn his quiet moods, his dry humor, his love for black coffee and old blues music. Or how deeply I'd come to care for him, not as a star, but as a man who still had so much light left inside. But time has a cruel way of folding everything you love into silence. Because today, when I saw him again after all these years, sitting in that same chair by the window, he looked at me with the same soft eyes. But this time, he didn't know who I was. He smiled politely, the way you'd smile at a stranger. And that's when I realized I had spent years remembering every detail about him, while he had quietly forgotten me completely. When I first got the call about a private home care position in Los Angeles, I didn't know who the client was. The agency said the name quietly, almost like it was a secret wrapped in respect. "You'll be working with Mr. Bruce Willis, if he agrees." I froze. For a second, I thought it was a joke. I had grown up watching his movies with my father. Die Hard, The Sixth Sense, Unbreakable. He wasn't just a name to me. He was part of the background noise of my childhood. That voice of strength and courage my dad used to quote when life got hard. I wanted to say no. Not because I wasn't honored, but because I was scared. Scared of seeing someone I admired in a vulnerable place. But something in me whispered, "Go." The day I arrived, his home didn't feel like the mansion people imagine when they think of movie stars. It was quiet, simple, surrounded by trees and long shadows. His daughter met me at the door, polite, tired, trying her best to smile through something heavy. "He likes mornings calm," she told me. "And please, don't treat him like a patient. He hates that word." That stayed with me. When I walked into his living room for the first time, I saw photos everywhere, framed moments from a life too big to fit in one house. Smiling co-stars, family, red carpets, but all of them looked like ghosts of a louder time. And then, there he was, sitting in a soft armchair, reading quietly. He looked up, and for a second, I forgot to breathe. He wasn't the man on screen anymore. He was softer, slower, more human than I ever imagined. But when he smiled, it was still him. That same spark, still alive beneath the years. "So you're the new one?" he said with a hint of humor in his voice. "Yes, sir," I answered, trying not to sound nervous. "Don't call me sir," he chuckled. "Makes me feel like I should salute." That small exchange broke the ice. Days turned into weeks. I learned his rhythms, the times he liked his coffee, the songs that calmed him when his thoughts got too tangled, the way he stared out the window before sunset as if counting the years between who he was and who he'd become. He didn't talk much about his films. When I asked, he'd just smile and say, "That was another lifetime. I'm just Bruce now." And that's exactly who he became to me, just Bruce. We'd sit quietly sometimes, no words needed. He had this way of existing in silence that made you feel safe in it too. He'd tell small stories, not about fame or success, but about his daughters, about nights shooting under rain machines, about laughter on set. There was one afternoon I'll never forget. He was watching old jazz clips on TV and I brought him tea. He looked up and said, People think the best thing about fame is being remembered, but the truth is, it's being seen. Really seen. Even just by one person. I didn't say anything. I just smiled. But that night, those words kept echoing in my mind. I didn't know it then, but maybe that's what our time together was. Two people quietly seeing each other when the rest of the world had stopped looking. He started trusting me with little things. Sometimes when his hands trembled slightly, I'd help him write notes. Other times he'd ask me to read aloud. Old scripts, letters, or sometimes just newspaper clippings he'd kept for no reason at all. And slowly the walls between us began to fade. He'd tease me about my handwriting. I'd tease him about his old glasses. It was never grand, never dramatic, but there was a gentleness to it, the kind of connection you can't force or fake. I became part of his routine. Morning walks through the garden, afternoon tea, quiet music at dusk. And though I was his nurse, it often felt more like being a quiet friend. Someone holding space for the parts of him no one else saw anymore. Sometimes, when he'd forget a name or lose a word mid-sentence, he'd look at me, that faint frustration in his eyes. And I'd just smile and say softly, "It's all right, Bruce, you're doing fine." And he'd smile back, relieved. That was our rhythm. Silence, patience, small talk, small smiles. Until one day, the silence began to change. I started noticing moments when he'd drift away, not just in thought, but in memory. He'd forget conversations, faces, entire afternoons. And yet, he always remembered me. At least back then he did. There's a certain sound the mind makes when it starts slipping away. Not a scream, not a cry. More like the faint hum of something fading in the background. At first I thought I was imagining it. He'd pause mid-sentence, searching for a word that used to come naturally. He'd laugh it off, saying, "Guess my brain's on vacation today." And I'd laugh too, because what else could we do? But over time, the pauses grew longer, the laughter shorter, and the silence heavier. It started one afternoon in the garden. He loved those walks. Slow circles around the small path, sunlight slipping between the leaves. He used to tell me stories there, about old movie sets, the smell of New York streets in the 80s, how he never liked fancy restaurants because burgers just taste more honest. But that day, he stopped walking mid-path and looked around, confused. "Where are we?" he asked softly. My heart sank. "In the garden, Bruce," I said gently. "At home." He nodded, smiled faintly, as if embarrassed, and kept walking. But the look in his eyes that day, it never left me. After that, the little slips came more often. He'd forget names, times, sometimes even my own. Once, I found him sitting in the living room, staring at a photo of his family. He pointed at one of the pictures and asked, "Do you know them?" I swallowed hard before answering, "Yes, I think you do too." He blinked, and for a moment I saw a flicker of recognition. Then it faded, like a candle in the wind. That night, I cried in my car before driving home. Not because he'd forgotten, but because I realized how much I cared that he had. I wasn't supposed to get attached. Nurses are trained to care professionally, not personally. But no textbook teaches you how to guard your heart when someone you admire looks at you with kindness one day and confusion the next. Still, I kept showing up. Every morning, every evening. I made his tea the same way, played his favorite songs, and read aloud when his mind felt cloudy. Some days he'd be himself again, sharp, witty, teasing me about my hair or asking if I ever took a day off. And on those days, it felt like sunshine returning after a long storm. But other days, he'd drift so far away I couldn't reach him. He'd stare at the television, blankly smiling at faces he no longer recognized. One evening, he turned to me suddenly and said, "You remind me of someone I used to know." I smiled sadly. "Maybe you still do." He tilted his head, curious. "Do we know each other well?" I wanted to say you once told me about your daughters, your favorite blues record, your fear of silence. I wanted to tell him I'd been there through every quiet night, through the tremors, the words that slipped away. But all I said was, Yeah, Bruce, we do. He smiled and nodded, satisfied, then went back to sipping his tea. That night, after putting him to bed, I sat alone on the porch. The house was dark except for the faint glow of the lamp in his room, and I realized I was grieving someone who was still alive. He was still there, breathing, smiling, living, but pieces of him were slowly slipping through invisible cracks. There were moments when I'd catch him humming an old tune, eyes closed, peaceful. And I'd think, maybe he remembers after all. But deep down, I knew memory is a fragile thing. It doesn't vanish all at once. It fades softly, like light at dusk. The hardest part wasn't the forgetting, it was pretending it didn't hurt. His daughters would visit sometimes. They'd hug him, laugh, and tell stories from the old days. He'd smile, nod, and for a few minutes it looked like the world was whole again. But after they left, he'd turn to me and whisper, "They seem nice. Are they friends of yours?" Each time he said that, I'd feel something inside me fracture just a little more. Yet I never corrected him harshly. I couldn't. Instead, I'd just hold his hand and say, "They love you very much." And he'd smile that quiet, grateful smile, the one that always made my chest ache. There was one night, one I'll never forget, when the electricity went out during a storm. The house was wrapped in darkness. I found him sitting by the window, listening to the rain. "You ever think about all the things we forget?" he asked suddenly. "All the people we were supposed to remember." His voice trembled, not from fear, but from something deeper. I sat beside him holding the flashlight low. "I think the heart remembers what the mind forgets," I said softly. He nodded, eyes glistening. "Then maybe that's enough." That line stayed with me. It still does. Because even as his memories slipped away, his kindness never did. He never stopped saying thank you. Never stopped smiling when I entered the room. Even when he didn't know who I was, some part of him, maybe that quiet corner of his heart, still knew what I was, someone who cared. And that somehow made the pain bearable. It happened on a Sunday morning, the kind of morning that feels too calm to carry heartbreak. The light filtered through the curtains in soft golden streaks, and the air smelled of fresh coffee and lavender. I'd brought him his breakfast like I always did, toast, eggs, and a small cup of tea he never finished. He was sitting by the window again, his favorite spot. His eyes were fixed on the garden, but his face was distant, like he was watching something only he could see. "Good morning, Bruce," I said gently. "Did you sleep well?" He turned slowly, eyes kind but empty. "I'm sorry, have we met?" At first I smiled. I thought he was joking. He'd teased me like that before. But there was no mischief in his voice this time, no spark of recognition. Just a soft, puzzled curiosity. My throat tightened. I placed the tray down, forcing my voice to stay steady. "It's me," I whispered. "I'm your nurse." He blinked a few times, studying my face as if searching for something familiar. Then he nodded politely. "Oh, of course, thank you for taking care of me." He said it like you'd thank a stranger for kindness on the street. And just like that, the world shifted, quietly but completely. I smiled, but my chest ached so hard it almost broke me. I busied myself with small tasks, adjusting his blanket, opening the window, anything to keep from crying in front of him. When I finally turned back, he was humming softly. I recognized the tune instantly, an old blues song he used to play when the house felt too still. The sound of it nearly undid me. He remembered the song, but not the one who always played it for him. That afternoon, his daughter came by. She saw my face the moment she stepped in. She knew. She hugged me tightly in the kitchen while he napped. "He doesn't remember much anymore," she whispered. "Please don't take it personally." I nodded, but tears still slipped out, because it wasn't just personal, it was everything. When you care for someone every day, hold their hand, calm their fears, listen to their laughter, it becomes a kind of love. Not romantic, not fleeting, but human. Deep, quiet, unconditional. And losing that connection felt like losing a part of myself. The next few days were the hardest. He treated me with the same warmth, the same kindness, but without the thread that once tied us together. I became a nurse again, not his nurse. Still, I showed up. Every morning, I greeted him with the same smile. Every night, I wished him good rest. Sometimes he'd ask my name and I'd tell him. Sometimes he'd forget a few minutes later, and I'd tell him again, softly, without sadness in my voice. Because love, I learned, isn't about being remembered. It's about remembering for the both of you. One evening, I was closing the curtains when he said something I'll never forget. "You're kind," he murmured, his voice low. "People like you make the world gentler." I froze, my eyes stinging. He didn't know my name anymore. He didn't remember our long talks, our shared jokes, or the nights I stayed late just to make sure he was okay. But somehow he still recognized kindness. And maybe that was enough. As the weeks passed, I started to see him differently. Not as the man I once knew, but as the man he was becoming. Still present, still gentle, still human. The day I left his care, the house felt heavier than ever. He was sitting by the window again, sunlight resting on his shoulders. I stood behind him for a long time, memorizing every detail. The shape of his hands, the soft rhythm of his breathing, the faint hum of that same blues tune under his breath. I didn't say goodbye, not really. I just whispered, "Take care, Bruce," and turned to leave. But just as I reached the door, I heard his voice, faint, almost unsure. "Hey, you sound familiar." I stopped. My heart leapt, but I didn't turn around. I just smiled through my tears and said, "Maybe I do." And then I walked out, carrying every memory he'd lost, holding them like fragile glass, because someone had to remember. It's strange how silence can hold so many echoes. Weeks passed after I left his care, yet his presence followed me everywhere. The sound of rain on my window reminded me of the nights he'd sit quietly, listening to storms like they were old friends. The smell of black coffee made me see his half smile again, the way he'd lift the cup with both hands like it was something sacred. I thought leaving would bring peace. But peace doesn't come from walking away. It comes from learning how to carry what stays behind. At first, I tried to move on. I took other patients, other homes, other names to remember. But no one ever felt quite like him. There was something about Bruce, a stillness, a weight, a kind of quiet strength that left a mark. I kept thinking about what he'd once said. People think the best part about fame is being remembered, but the truth is, it's being seen. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that's all any of us ever want. To be seen, to be understood, to be loved quietly, without needing to be remembered forever. There were nights I'd dream of that house, the soft light, the slow walks in the garden, the distant sound of blues humming through the halls. In those dreams, he always looked at me like he used to, warm, steady, familiar. And I'd wake up with tears on my face, but also with a strange kind of calm. Because maybe memory isn't about names or moments. Maybe it's about feeling, and maybe, somewhere deep in his heart, he still felt the care, the gentleness, the presence. One day, months later, I got a letter. It was from his daughter. She wrote to thank me again, said he was doing all right, said he still smiled when that old blues song came on. And then she wrote something that made me stop reading for a moment. Sometimes he hums that song, and when we ask him where he heard it, he says, "I don't remember her name, but she had kind eyes." I pressed the paper to my chest and cried quietly. Not out of sadness, but out of gratitude. Because even if he'd forgotten everything else, kind eyes was enough. It reminded me that love doesn't vanish when memory fades. It lingers, in gestures, in echoes, in the way someone still feels safe without knowing why. So I began to write, not for anyone else, just for me. Little notes about the days we spent together. The way he'd laugh at his own jokes. The way he'd hum when he was lost in thought. The way he'd fall silent when words failed him. And how I'd fill that silence with patience. I wrote because I realized something simple, something pure. Sometimes remembering isn't about holding on. It's about honoring what once was. And in doing that, I found peace. I started walking in my own garden every morning like we used to. I'd carry a thermos of tea, hum that same blues tune under my breath, and whisper into the breeze, "I remember for both of us, Bruce." And somehow that was enough, because love, real love, doesn't end when someone forgets your name. It lives quietly, tucked between the spaces of memory and time, waiting to be carried by the ones who still remember. And that's what I did. I carried him. In the silence, in the rain, in the small, gentle ways that love still speaks, without ever needing words. Sometimes when I look back, it feels like those days were part of another lifetime, a dream I once lived inside. But every now and then, something small pulls me back. A melody playing faintly in a cafe, the flicker of an old movie on a late-night channel, or just a man's quiet laugh that sounds a little too familiar, and I smile. Because somewhere in that moment I feel him again. Not the actor, not the legend, but the man I knew when the world had gone quiet around him. People often ask me if it's painful, knowing he forgot me. I tell them it's not pain anymore. It's gratitude. The kind that lingers softly, like the scent of rain long after the storm. I learned that we don't love people so they'll remember us. We love them because something in us recognizes something in them. A mirror, a warmth, a spark. And even if memory fades, love doesn't. It just changes shape. When you truly care for someone, their story becomes part of yours, stitched quietly into your soul. You carry their laughter, their lessons, their small kindnesses, and maybe that's how people really stay alive. Not in fame or photographs, but in the hearts of those who choose to remember them with love. Bruce once told me, "The heart remembers what the mind forgets." Back then, I thought it was just a line, something poetic he said in passing. But now I know it was a truth he somehow understood before the rest of us did. Because even when his memory slipped away, his heart never changed. He was still gentle, still thankful, still human. And maybe that's what matters most. Not what we remember, but how we make others feel while we still can. So if you're listening to this, I hope you remember one thing. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't being remembered. It's remembering someone else, even when the world forgets them. Because love, in its quietest form, is just that. Staying when memory fades, holding on softly, and choosing every day to remember. And wherever he is now, sitting by another window, humming that old song, I hope he feels it too. The warmth, the care, the small invisible thread that still connects us. Because I do, every day. Sometimes love is just remembering for the both of you. If this story touched your heart, maybe it's because we all have someone we still remember, even when they don't remember us. Thank you for listening. This was TalksBerry, where every story is a heartbeat, softly told.